I'm Andrew Sherman. I'm a Texas transplant who has always been in pursuit of art as a career. I've played in bands, pursued an acting career in Hollywood, but I found it behind the lens of a camera here in Dallas, Texas. I was born in New York. I've lived in Chicago, Los Angeles, Austin, but I love Dallas. There's a magical artistic scene in Dallas that mostly goes unnoticed to the outside world. This podcast is focused on what makes it so special and the people who make it thrive artistically. If you don't live here, and even if you do, you might not have heard of them. This is the Dallas Famous Podcast. This week on the Dallas Famous Podcast, I'm trying something different. I recently wrote my first non-concert review article for the Dallas Observer on the state of jam bands in Dallas. First off, I was blown away by the support over this article. When I take a photo, I can tell if it's good. With my writing, not so much, so thanks for all the love. Being my first article, I got very excited and did 5 interviews. After I had them all, I realized I probably had maybe 2 or 3 articles, so I had to leave most of the interviews out. I guess that's probably how it normally goes, first time. Then I remembered I have a podcast. So today's episode is a semi-cohesive deeper dive into the jam band scene here in Dallas. Hope it doesn't get too confusing, but we have Kenny Withrow, guitarist from the new Bohemians, among many, many other musical projects. John Larue, owner of Deep Ellum Art Company. Micheal Kervin, talent buyer and promoter of Time to Fly Music, which we've had on the show before. And the guys that I left out, Chad Cocuzza, drummer of Spoonfed Tribe and a frequent member of Andy Franco and the UN. And finally, Leland Kracher, founding member of Mojo, as well as the solo project Plane Keys. Leland and the Mojo boys were cool enough to let me use unreleased music for this episode, so there's a bonus too. Sit back and try to follow this mashup episode of the Dallas jam band scene this week on Dallas Famous. Here's Kenny Withrow. So first of all, what would be your definition of a jam band?
A jam band, I think, is a good way to name an improvising rock band. That's what it's been for a long time. It's just like a good name for a rock band that jams a lot. Kind of started in the 60s. They didn't really call it jam bands. Everybody was jamming. Now it's sort of, keeping that trip alive. You just kind of call it jam band,
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of redundant to say that back when everybody jammed.
Right.
But now it's hybrid into, now it's gotten electronic disco biscuits. That's what they're called, right?
Yeah.
I've followed a lot in the 90s. I followed a lot of the hybrid jam bands that have machines in them and stuff like that. But, it's usually ways of improvising, but generally it was rock. It's kind of hybrided out a little bit.
Here's John Larue.
Wow, that's a fun one. Definition for a jam band is a band that utilizes improvisation in live settings primarily. I mean, I think it's, jam bands record jams as well. But I think that's a big part of it is that improvisational conversation between musicians, where, a song that was written at 3 minutes can stretch out to 6 because of those opportunities to pass the hat. It's kind of a communal thing where there's a musical conversation going on that exceeds the original concept of a song and doesn't necessarily have a scripted direction, which is where you can get some really cool moments that don't exist otherwise. They're fleeting. So jam band, a band that creates those fleeting moments and doesn't just play a scripted song as it was recorded the same way every time they approach it.
Here's Leland Kracher.
That's a good question. Jam band to me is a band that is oriented there, whose live show and most of their intention is predicated around improvisational composition. So it's not just getting up there and playing a song and then getting to like what would traditionally be a solo section and then just noodling on that for like an hour. That's what a lot of people think jam bands are, and I think that's the watered down, young version. But a true jam band that is exploring that is a band that is focused on and primarily orients around improvisational composition.
Here's Chad Cocuzza.
Oh man, you gotta have a few, at least a handful of wooks in the crowd. You gotta have some hats with some beads and some what are they, the pins, you know, you're going to be a lot of tie-dye in the audience. And then you're going to have at least, you know, one Grateful Dead cover per set, because that's pretty standard in the jam band scene, you know.
Okay.
No, man, you know, you got the jam band scene, you know, it's something that's it's kind of like, I remember it really coming into play for me back in like the late 90s, when, you know, you had your Grateful Dead, you had your Fish going and stuff like that, you had your Widespread Panics and stuff. And then you know, as a member of Spoonfed Tribe, you know, we always got put into that category of jam band, which, you know, I think we were a little bit heavier and a little bit not really jam band. But yeah, jam bands, you know, you're going to have your long guitar solos, you're going to have your 20-minute songs, you're going to have people dancing like crazy in the audience. And you know, it's a very communal part of the music scene, I believe. I think there's a huge community for that stuff. So
Here's Micheal Kervin.
You know, I mean, what the jam scene to me is bands with some improvisation, bands that mesh different flavors of rock and roll, extend their songs. It's not just, you know, Grateful Dead. It's more than that. Then they maintain creative control on their product. You know, that's one thing that kind of defines the jam scene, in my opinion, too, is a lot of these upper echelon ones, in the end, they wind up having their own record labels, they control their merchandise and their path, you know, versus having some record company or something do it for them.
Kenny Withrow. Like your group of friends, is that how the jam scene in Dallas, kind of the live kind of getting together and jamming out, is that kind of how that happened?
Absolutely, yeah. Coming out of Arts Magnet High School, there were a lot of great players. Daryl Phillips, the bass player for Little Sister, Sister Seven, a lot of those people came from Arts Magnet. I think Patrice Pike, of course. And Daryl Phillips, he's, you know, we had a group of friends known as the Munch Puppies in high school, which Aaron Comas, John Bush, Alan Emmert from Brave Combo, Danny O'Brien, the trumpet player from Brave Combo. I mean, a lot of badass players came from that group. Texas Slim Sullivan, the blues player, Gerald O'Rigori, just a lot of very successful musicians. They came from anywhere. They were our group of friends. And what happened, and the reason I mention all this is because, yeah, we started doing jamming at Club Dada. Club Dada, there was music every night of the week, you know. So New Bohemians, we used to play under an assumed name. There's a lot of these are on archive.org, but we would play under an assumed name and just make up shit all night and stuff like that. And so jamming and things like that, and 10 Hands, they had their own brand of jamming, but more percussion oriented, but definitely freaking jammers. And Dallas kind of became a bit of a jam scene. There was Bill Acerta, and what are the other guys' name? Belly Ensemble. Those guys were outrageous good musicians. There's Buddy Muhammad, who was a bass player, and Jamal Muhammad, who's known as more of a Doonbeck player. But they play all sorts of instruments, and they had something called Belly Ensemble, and they would play at Club Dada, and it was just outrageous, like Arabic fusion jazz. You know, it was. Anyway, there was a lot of jamming going on in the 80s, any night of the week and shit like that. But again, we didn't really call it jam band. We jammed a lot. We've always jammed. You know,
right. I don't think they started calling it jam bands until somewhere in the 90s, I feel like.
Right. And like I said, I think that's just it's like a way. My other friends, you know, of the Spin Doctors and, you know, those guys, once the what was known as the Horde Tour. So that was kind of early 90s, where the roots of a lot of that jam music, Blues Traveler, Spin Doctors, Fish, shit, all of them. Widespread.
Oh, Widespread. Yeah.
They were definitely. Anyway, so a lot of that stuff, and they even had a tour, and they went a few years, and that was a lot of the jam scene. In the 90s, when electronica came around, a lot of things chilled out, and when grunge hit, a lot of shit went underground, especially jam music. I lived in Seattle in the 90s, and there were jam bands, a band called Tough Mama, and I jammed with a lot of those guys, and there was jam music around, but it kind of went underground a little bit. Now it's a lot of that, and you know, soon, you know, it's going to transition. You know, kids that were raised on jam music. You know what I'm saying? That generation that's going to come around, you know, that were kids when I first started playing with Forgotten Space, are they're going to start forming bands that aren't Grateful Dead. And jam music is, I hope at least, and it's going to be kind of a thing, but it's going to hybrid into something we haven't seen before, I hope.
I feel like it's going that way already, for sure. I mean, because there's bands that I cover and everyone's like, this is a jam band. And like, so my first thought is Fish and Dead. And then it's not really anything like that, but it's definitely a jam and it's definitely that same structure. So, I mean, I feel like it's changing. I don't know what you would call it yet, but
Right.
So just trying to get the history. So you're saying kind of like the combination of you guys are already doing this jam and then the Horde Tour kind of, did it kind of like ignite the scene in a way? Like locally here?
Well,
Like
locally here. Well, that's kind of out of a national jam scene. So in Dallas, so I had moved to Seattle around that time, and live music chilled for a bit, you know. So the jam scene that was happening with New Bohemians jamming a lot and just sort of calling jams. There was you know, an off spins from New Bohemians. Matt was always putting together a band. There's a band called the Dudes that with Matt. And anyway, there were that scene kind of started to chill when Deep Ellum started to chill out, when electronica became a thing, and a lot of the kids were going to warehouses and not clubs as much, and stuff really dried up, you know, in Deep Ellum for a bit. I mean, a lot, you know. The Dead thing was happening though. But anyway, that all, you know, started with What a Long Strange Trip It's Been, Wallstib. That started at RC's as kind of an acoustic thing. It sort of became a happening, 88, 89. Then I started to hear about it around 1990, I think. Then it filtered over into Club Dada, and my good friend Scott Parkin thought of the name The Dead Thing. And that's where Wallstib would play. This guy, Sam Burkhart, who's still around, guitar player. Scott Johnson was one of the early players. Wendy's, Chuck Spurlock, and anyway, a lot of players early on. That's where I actually met Scott. He had a big mohawk and was jumping around playing bass in the early Wallstib.
Huh.
So that was huge. The Dead thing became this big event on Saturdays where gobs of people came. Musicians were paid great. People really drank in those days. People, bartender Chrissy, she had a little bar on the inside, and Jello shot, you know, this was still just coming out of the 80s, and Jello shots and just shit like that. People would get hammered. It was really wildly successful. They would play inside and the whole backyard was full and the whole inside was full. And eventually they would let people sell t-shirts, and, you know, it was a big scene. It was a huge scene. That went on for a while. I eventually joined that with Scott before we moved to Seattle. John Bush played drums some, Chuck Spurlock, and Scott was playing bass some. Then he moved to guitar. Bob played some bass, and, you know, stuff like that. The Dead thing. So that was the jam scene for quite a while. Even after I came back from Seattle, they had a whole, you know, the Dead thing had the name of the band became the Dead thing, and they had a rotating, you know.
John Larue.
I don't remember like there being a scene specifically when the first real jam band that I ever saw in Dallas, as far as, you know, some of the people would recognize, was Fish. And I've been listening to them for quite a while. I discovered them in boarding school in the early 90s. And when I came back to Dallas, they were playing that 94 Bomb Factory show. And 94, 95. Come back.
You got that epic tweezer. You were there for that.
We did. And that was one of those shows, like, I told a whole lot of my friends, I'm like, you have to come with me to this show. And I think I ended up bringing about 10 people with me. And I know for a fact that 3 of those people went on to like follow those guys around, you know, on a summer tour. And so they've seen their fair share of shows. So it definitely made an impact on them, having never seen them. But that was really the first like foray into the jam band scene that I can recall, other than, you know, listening to like Stevie Ray Vaughan as a kid, and these musicians that had the ability to solo, like you were saying, and take things in different directions. But with Fish, I don't feel like it's always a solo that makes it a jam. There's so much collaborative stretching and communication of, all right, well, this song is X number of measures. Let's go ahead and take it out another 10 measures in this one section. And if it feels good, let's keep going. But, you know, if it doesn't, you know, if we're ready to transition, I'll give you that look. And then, you know, everyone else knows that that's the look, that at the end of this measure, we're going back into the scripted thing, or into the next song or whatever. So it was really one of the first times I saw a group of 4 musicians communicating like that on stage and whipping the crowd into a frenzy. You know, that was really exciting to see.
I guess there was a void. So you, if I correct me if I'm wrong, you started the Facebook Where It's At Dallas Jamily, which was essentially like a list of concerts that were happening.
Yeah, so I would share a list via email with a bunch of my friends, pretty much every month, and just say, hey, what am I missing this month? You know, it's kind of the gist of it to start with. And that started like, I mean, early 2000s, when I came back to Dallas after college. You know, going to see shows is always really a big part of my personal joy, and a lot of my friends as well. I had several friends that went to school at UT, so, you know, music scene obviously is huge there. They were obviously instrumental in turning me on to new stuff that I'd never heard of. And being in Colorado, you know, I was listening to String Cheese Incident when those guys first kind of started cutting their teeth. So sharing that kind of stuff was always exciting, amongst friends. Kind of like, you know, how did you find out about the last great restaurant that you went to? More than likely a friend told you. You know, it's that word of mouth thing. And one of my friends criticized me, like, you know, this is great and all, but it sure is, you know, a lot of work to keep up with month to month, you know, because people would add stuff and then I would revise the email and send out the list again. And someone just said, hey, why don't you like put this someplace public where we can all see it? And I didn't really know what that looked like at the time. I wasn't into Facebook when I was doing all the original list. And then when my daughter was born, it just, you know, kind of seemed like a forced inevitability. You know, share pictures, and you know, that was pretty much it. It was like once I got there, it was like, oh, there's groups on here. So it wasn't long after that the Jamly page really seemed to make a lot more sense, to put that together. And I started off with something smaller than that was just private. It was just those guys. And then they were like, why don't you make this, you know, public? Why don't you make this where we can add more people to? I want to add this guy. Will you add this guy, this girl? And that was pretty much it from there. I was like, cool. Well, let's make an actual joinable thing that kind of has some structure to it, and keep the list in the same format, because we're all kind of all over the place with how we would put things together in that list format. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been really cool to see who the big contributors are in that list, and to see the variety of things that people are into, because I think we have a lot of like-minded music fans in there. But like-minded doesn't mean like a narrow focus. In this case, you see a really broad listing of stuff in that list. I mean, Justin Bieber was on there right next to the Roger Waters thing, you know.
Oh, wow.
So you just have that interesting juxtaposition there. And somebody in that group was stoked about the Justin Bieber thing. Like, they wanted to go see that, you know. And I'm down. I would probably go watch that show too, just to see it, just to say like, yeah, I saw that kid perform. But I wish I'd seen him, you know, when he was 10 years younger, just to say I'd seen that, and then, you know, today's version.
Sure.
But that's just because I like to see how things evolve and grow, especially the pop culture stuff. There's so much out there that I think the lines are starting to get crossed more and more every day, which is great, because we live in such a neat time where genres can be blended together from different time periods, different styles. It really, it's like this great big music melting pot where you can take from anything and put it together. And as long as people dig it, like, it's viable.
What was it like when you first started in that scene here in Dallas specifically?
Oh man, I mean, you know, Dallas was a real kind of a different spot for us, because, you know, you would have almost like you know, these hard rock metal kind of scene guys coming out, and then you'd have you know, your hippy dippy skirt wearing peeps come out and all that stuff. So I really thought it was just you know, I was a bit younger back then, of course, but something that was kind of fresh to me. You know, I really enjoyed the fact that everybody would come in, no matter who you were, and everybody was accepted, and everybody sort of loved each other. And you know, everybody had a great time with each other.
Absolutely. So wait, so would you say then that Spoonfed is not a jam band, or what would you say?
Well, I'd say we are a jam band, but I mean, kind of on the heavier side. It was like a lot of, you know, kind of, you know, there's the crunch in there with the distortion. There's the really heavy drums. There's a little bit of screaming going on. There's all kinds of wacky stuff. But yeah, granted, we did have 10, 15-minute long jams and stuff. And a lot of the same audience would come out to see us and then go see, you know, another jam band, quote unquote, the next weekend or whatever. So we just they didn't really know where to put us, so we got stuck in the jam band scene, baby.
Yeah, gotcha. Micheal Kervin. I'm just trying to fill in some gaps of history. So you come back to Dallas. Are you booking bands right away?
Yes.
Okay.
In 2006, when I came back, I started to book a little bit, especially when the Green Elephant moved over from where the Barley House is now. The Barley House used to be on Knox Henderson back in the day. And then they moved over to where the Green Elephant was, and they kind of pushed the Green Elephant out of there and over to what was called the Home Bar, which is where the Green Elephant is now. And so it happened to be right at that change, and the sound guy up there, Arthur, knew me from Austin and from Dallas and such, and he got me booking the Wednesdays and Fridays. They were only open on Wednesdays and Fridays. Yeah, I helped navigate that drum jam that goes on over there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I helped navigate that there.
Oh wow!
Back in the day when it was one block over on what was Yale, now is SMU Boulevard. So yeah, I started that, and then of course Mike and I were talking from the beginning at Granada, and I used to book even nights into Granada. Like I technically put Snarky Puppy's first show there in 2008, but with On the One, the drummer from Carl Denson's Tiny Universe, and Grindy Styles, Moving Matter, Fatty Lumpkin, and in 2007 and 8, 9, you know, even some into there, before Granada Theater got really well known, I helped with some dates there, even on Fridays and Saturdays. And then as Granada grew and it started to become really well known, those dates on Fridays and Saturdays I couldn't get anymore with local stuff, you know, because it was filled with touring talent. And then we got pushed to like doing Wednesdays, Thursdays, or Tuesdays sometimes, and we did some of that for a little bit. And then even that eventually got pushed because of Granada's success and big shows and touring stuff coming through. And then there was a time period too that we were able to put a lot of support acts into Granada for those big names, you know, sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then over time, that changed because a lot of the support stuff that's chosen at Granada isn't by the theater, it's by the big act itself. So the support usually chosen by those acts a lot more now than in the past. So it's been interesting to see that dynamic kind of change. But yeah, man, in those early days, definitely.
And so was it? Would you say Mike was a taper, right? Was he a deadhead?
He was in his spreadhead, big time spreadhead. Me and him were both big time spreadheads. Taped a lot of Panic shows.
Oh right, okay.
And Mike used to have CD World, 2 of them, one in Addison and one there, right on the corner, man, where Floyd's barbershop is, pretty much at Mockingbird in Greenville. And I was going down to college. I'd gotten to know the people at Technophilia really well, and I started managing out, you know, right around getting out of college, right before I graduated, 98, 99, 2000. I used to come into town with crates of CDs, and me and Mike would trade back and forth. And of course, Larry was coming in. You know, some of the jam scene in those days that was fun was Larry and the Dead Thing. Like those were probably, I would say, for like and then there was Olo Spo for a little bit, right, which people will talk about, you know, and one of the best like kind of jam scene experiences in those days you could get in the late 90s and early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, was the Dead Thing and Larry at Club Dada, where the Dead Thing would play inside stage, and then from like 7 to 10 or 6 to 9 or whatever it was, and then And then Larry would do the outside late night, and it was just a sea of hippie-loving people. Those were some good times, but there wasn't a lot of that. Larry was coming to town and feeding that jam scene, local stuff out of Austin. Olo Spo was a young band. Larry helped Olo Spo get going and like get the agent at Mountain High Music that we had. And the people really loved Olo Spo as a jam scene band. They really did. Chris Holt, amazing. I mean, he had a real Trey-like thing going on. The dude could rip fish, and he was talented. But they didn't really dig the jam scene personally. I don't think that was anything, a demographic or a vibe or a scene that they wanted to, like, be pigeonholed into. I remember that being a topic of discussion and maybe some frustration on their part when all these jam scene people loved them, and then they kind of weren't too into it, and that lasted for a while. But there was a time where Olospo, man, they were fucking rocking this town, and the Larry Olospo ties were pretty cool, and that was all in the 2000s, and again, like, just a lot of Austin was coming in, and in 2006 when I had to come back to help my dad die, and I couldn't leave my mom, and I was like, well, all right. And that's when I started to get involved. And I'd already had time like going down to Austin. I was already doing stuff at the Mercury in 2004, 2005. And I was already helping some of the promoters doing things. And I used to take care of guys like, Humphreys McGee and Galactic in those days, kind of artist hospo stuff. But anyway, I worked at the Mercury on 6th Street for a handful of years in those times as I was in between gigs with Larry or on the road. Because I was doing like 250 dates a year with Larry. But that all kind of navigated, and then I got here in 2006, and, just like a local jam scene. I'm talking like every night, like all the time. And of course, Deep Ellum was having its tough times in those days, and a lot of it was Lower Greenville. There was some pretty cool stuff going on. The collab crew, man, they were always staple, and I'm so happy to see that they still are. Much respect and love to the collab crew and all their years, giving us those Tuesday nights. We had Funky Knuckles on Monday nights, Bernard Wright on Monday nights at Gazelig. We had a time frame where 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, there was a lot of stuff at Gazelig and in the Lower Greenville area where now you have Truck Yard, different stuff. I wish we could get some of that live music stuff back, but they kind of pushed a lot of that. The Lakewood Bar and Grill, there was the LBG. I used to work there. I booked that place, and this was right by the Lakewood Theater. One time Mo played the Lakewood Theater. I had put Fatty Lumpkin at the LBG, and we drew a little treasure map for the after party. And so the Lakewood Bar and Grill, man, people might remember that had some good. That's a one to mention. Like that had some good years, 8, 9, 10. Like I lived over there in Lakewood and worked at the Lakewood Bar and Grill. I helped book a lot of the music there. I worked the door and tried to bring some of the jam scene there. Put the Greyhounds into this little place, Eric McFadden. And then, Dada things start. Then you start seeing some of the stuff come back around at Deep Ellum, which is, I love Deep Ellum always, and seeing the cycle of it over the last 30 years has been interesting, but 30 plus, I'm 31. Anyway, but yeah, so, to see the scene, in those days, trying to like, not only stuff coming through the big stuff, but the local artists working together, and we have a lot of talent here at DF. They always have, and it's been a pleasure to try to help support that any way I could over the years, and get musicians to know each other that maybe don't, and create those relationships or super groups to help them get opportunity with gigs, and then help the Dallas groups get out of Dallas. That was a big part of it too, and I was trying to bring some bands in, and for your Earfunks and Zugmas, and I booked the Motet at the Green Elephant in 2008. Hell, I got them for $300. Crazy.
Wow.
I put Topaz supporting them. This was, and it was really good to have the Green Elephant. You had the outside area, you had the green friendly type of vibe, and I love that place. I'm happy to see it still doing its thing, of course, and. We had the Greenville area, the Lakewood area, you got now Deep Ellum and is back and forth. Of course, the pandemic definitely has messed with everybody, but it's been interesting to see the jam scene over the last, for me, with 2023, and to be I've been in the grind, in the trenches since, 2006, really. And especially that summer and that fall of 2006 and on, right after my father died that spring, I just put my head down And part of it too was some of these bands coming to town from Oxford or New Orleans or Jackson or Nashville or Denver, to name a few, or Cali, wherever, and having them come through and putting them up. And I realized the jam scene in those days, we didn't have the numbers, and talking with other promoters, they thought it was a little crazy because, they're booking indie rock or punk rock or hip hop or something else, or the EDM was starting to kind of really come up, I get it. And that's what would sell a lot more tickets, and then we'd have a jam scene show with 50 people or 60 people. But I tell you what, that 50 or 60 people sometimes would drink that 50 indie rock crew under the table. The bar rings were higher. Sometimes that was something that was always interesting to see, the bar rings in the jam scene be so astronomically bigger. And then you have your Texas country and all these other different genres and scenes, which is cool. But the jam scene here, and not just like on Friday night, I was thinking back in those days, I was like, but every day, man, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the time. And not just your big shows, you have to go spend $30 on a ticket those days or whatever, but a local band you could come out to see for $5 or $10. And, and then the Sundown popped up, and it was like, hell yeah, and at first Mike was thinking just bar. I was like, put me in, coach, I'm ready to go. And he's like, no live music, just bar and lounge. And I was just like, wait. I've never been more like poodled in my life. And then over time, the 10 to 1 or 10 to 2 in those days, because everyone was pushing it to 2, and the bar openings were so good. So I was like, dude, I'm gonna build a little stage and do some live music. And I'm like, hell yeah, let's do this. Like, I don't know, maybe like it was 10, maybe right 9, 10. I can't remember. I have to talk to Mike about that. But and so I was like, okay, right on. And so we started having like Future Funk Lounge Tuesdays. I got the Funky Knuckles over there on Mondays for a good couple years. And we had the Funky Knuckles Mondays, Future Funk Lounge Tuesdays, where I was working with Mikey Raj, and that's when we brought in Closey and other badass DJs that are doing their thing these days that came in. And, we had such an opportunity in those days working with Mikey Raj, and then of course Josh Smith starts doing his thing, coming up and representing, which was great. And I was the first to want to high five him and like, let's work together. And I had some time there, Andrew, where I was able to, and I'm exhausted with all that now. I'm just getting too old and to want to try to do all that jazz, but where I was, helping those bands come through and put them in Austin, Fort Worth, Dallas, and Lubbock. Mm-hmm. And those years really helped me stimulate the jam scene here locally in Dallas, just by some of that opportunity outside of the area that allowed me to get them to come through.
John Larue. Well, so then I'm sure stuff happens in between, but then you opened Deep Ellum Art Co., which, has a Grateful Dead insignia right in some of the logos, and it's definitely the jam band mecca. A lot of bands wouldn't even have a place to play, maybe. What was the reasoning behind that?
It's kind of a fun story. Gary and I are obviously music fans. I say music festival junkies, and people don't like that word junkie because it has such a negative connotation, but we really love that scene and that vibe of a group of people coming together that are, again, like-minded. There isn't a stranger at a music festival because you're all there for the same lineup. You already know everybody kind of likes the same thing. It's neat. And the art that goes along with that, the vendors. So we'd always kind of kicked around the idea since our first Bonnaroo in 2012, I think it was. Like, yeah, it'd be so cool to have a space like this that doesn't go away on Sunday. What an interesting concept. Mm-hmm. Like have a festival type space with that vibe that exists year round. And we always joked about like, yeah, it'd be so cool to build a place. And we own a restaurant concept called SoCal Tacos, and we had one restaurant at the time, which has since closed. But we were looking for another location, and a friend said, hey, go look at this 3200 Commerce Street in Deep Ellum. It might be a good spot for SoCal. And I pulled up and saw that it was the Artco building, and immediately said, oh, hell no. Like, it's the Artco. Like, that building was in Bottle Rocket. I've driven past it thousands of times and always wondered what's an Artco? What is that? What's going on there? And then we get our first glimpse inside, and it was dirt all over the floor. Just a total mess. The backyard was a sty. The outbuilding, well, the pavilion was an outbuilding. It was more of a drug den than anything else, and quasi shelter. It was just really, really rough to start with. And it wasn't that I wasn't interested in transforming that space into, something else. It was that it seemed sacrilegious to make it into a restaurant, especially, off the beaten path. It would have been kind of difficult to garner attention down there as a restaurant. So I immediately told the guys that I was touring the property with, I said, no, I wouldn't put my restaurant here. But if I were you guys, I would do something like this. And I kind of started describing, like, stage at this end and a bar, and the opportunity to have food trucks outside and make the yard a nice oasis that's colorful and vibrant with art everywhere. Because it already says Art Co. on the building. Why would you ever want to change that? I think someone in the neighborhood would probably be pretty pissed off if the Art Co. building became, some bougie pinky up type restaurant or bar. It just was in my mind that this just kind of resonated. So I parted ways with those guys that day, just not really thinking anything else of it. Like, wow, what a cool space. That would be such a neat thing. And then about 6 days later, Carrie and I were driving out of town with kiddos in the car, and we got a call from those guys, and they said, hey, we want to do that. We want to do that thing you're talking about. We don't want to do a restaurant. We don't want to try and, build a nightclub down here. We really like the idea of what you were talking about, having, something that's art centric and going with what's already there. And I've never done anything like that. Carrie's never done anything like that. It was always kind of a what if we could, maybe, pipe dream type thing. And there it was, like, actually an option in our laps that we never considered. Between the day that I walked out of that place and the day that we got that phone call, we talked about it, but it was like more of just that, like, fantasy, like, yeah, that would be pretty neat. And then when we got that call, it was like, well, this is probably what we should do. Like, if it's something that they're interested in, we should probably just see where it goes at the very least. So we insisted on being able to buy into the properties so that we had some rug underneath our feet that couldn't be pulled out. And kind of the rest is history, so to speak. But that it used to be a parts warehouse. That's one of my favorite things about that building, is you can still see the path and the shelf and the path and the shelf and the path and the shelf all the way across the floor. And then where the front counter used to be. So when we had the opportunity to come in and, like, paint the floors or do a whole bunch of stuff, I got to give credit to Mike Schroeder, because he was the one that was like, nobody cares what your floors look like, dude. No one cares. Don't waste time and money on the floor. We got a great idea, because what we have here is pretty cool. And he's like, yeah, and again, no one cares, and it tells a story. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, we won't change that. So it's fun to have those kind of reminders of, like, art is one of those things that kind of shows itself in the strangest places sometimes, and I don't look at our floor and think, well, that's art, but it tells a story, and it tells the story of the Art Co. that was the Parts Co. that was, a thriving business for many years before it sat there completely dormant for about 30. And it's just been fun to breathe new life into that space, and to get to know some of the spirits that are still there. I think our resident ghost has kind of eased up on us a little bit since we first moved in. We have less power turning on and off, and like flickering and things like that. But I think we made them happy. We honored the space as best we could.
Right. Leland Kracher. Last question. Where do you see the future of the jam scene in Dallas?
I think the future of jam is in an interesting place around the nation and world right now in general. Bands aren't really doing the same tour grind that they were pre-COVID, and it's changed a lot. Where play the 150 shows a year and be on the road forever type thing is not really the model anymore. So I feel like, if you look, there's different bands. One that's coming to mind right now is like La Special, where they're from the Northeast. They are doing something really unique but accepted by the jam scene. They're not exactly a jam band, but they improvise here and there. But the vibe that they create is very much in the theme of jam. And so I feel like the jam scene here is going to be leaning more into that. I feel like there will still be a lot of improv. There'll still be the dead oriented style, either band, cover bands, playing it at some of the highest levels in the country, right? I mean, we're very spoiled here with the bands we have. So I think that lane will continue to develop and mature and grow and curate. But from like our perspective as Mojo and other people in our kind of lane are coming up behind us, I think it's going to be a lot more oriented around kind of what I touched on earlier, where the most successful jam bands have good songs. They have good things to be able to go back and listen to, and then they improvise from that structure. And I feel like the Dallas jam scene will lean a lot more into that if it wants to see growth and success than just straight up leaning onto improvisational jams and live shows. So I think the future of the jam scene in Dallas is much more oriented around bands like us and others getting into studio situations and presenting really catchy, crunchy grooves in minute forms or palatable forms that the current algorithm and world likes with social media, drawing people in to the jam scene without them maybe knowing it's a jam scene. And then they come to our show and it's like, holy, what that's the song that I heard on Instagram that was a 90-second clip or something, and now it's are they still playing the same song? And it's 15 minutes. I think we're gonna sneak jam onto people more than we're gonna be able to say like, hey, we're a jam band. I think we're gonna have to draw them in.
John Larue.
Well, so I mean, everyone I've talked to has said that Deep Ellum Art Company has become the jam bass kind of like spot, as it were. How do you feel about the jam band scene now that you've had Artco open for a while, like the state of it?
Oh, I think it's a lot stronger. And before we even opened, I would say, Mike Schroeder with Granada has been fostering that scene for a while. Before Granada, even with CD World, and that's where I got a ton of my Grateful Dead recordings. Well, I almost call them bootlegs. They're not bootlegs. They're licensed, allowed recordings.
Right.
But I got a ton of those from there, and learned about other bands from that shop over there on Greenville. And then with him moving into the Granada space and then into Sundown, he's been instrumental in bringing no pun intended in bringing music to town, the music that I love, and breaking in new bands. I mean, seeing Pigeons playing ping pong on the Sundown stage, like,
yes,
was
the pivotal
awesome.
show for me personally. Yeah,
that's just one example. That's just
yeah.
But I think because of his efforts, then that lays the groundwork for a jamgrass artist like Billy Strings to come to Artco for his first time in Dallas and go Artco, Bomb Factory, Toyota Music Factory. And I don't know where he's going to be next, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to hear like American Airlines Center or Starplex or something,
Yeah.
Of similar size thrown into that mix. So it's the scene has definitely grown by leaps and bounds just in the last 20 years. I say probably 25 years, thanks to Mike, really, and to Mike Kervin as well, working right alongside him. Mike was in Austin, going to school, and then was in contact with so many great jam bands there. Austin's always had a little bit more jam band scene than we have, and bringing so many of those guys to Dallas. Kervin has been instrumental in that, and to continue to foster that, and to promote things like Jam Cruise and the Wakarusa festivals and things like that bring those big acts close to us within a short drive. It's been really awesome to have those folks in the scene. It makes a big difference, man. It really does.
Mm-hmm. Last question. How do you see the future of the jam band scene in Dallas?
Well, I think it's only going to get better. I mean, we have the proof there is in these younger acts and even the older acts that are bringing out young crowds. For our Forgotten Space stuff, we see several folks there in their 20s, and that's encouragement to say the least. To see Billy Strings, selling out big spots like Toyota Music Factory or Bomb Factory, that definitely shows that there is a demand for this in our scene. And I think it's just going to keep growing. There's 8 million people in Dallas almost. They're in the DFW Metroplex. You got 8 million people. Some of those people are going to be jam band fans.
Yeah.
It's just going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, amazing bands like Snarky Puppy, like those guys, well, I don't know that I would call them a jam band. You know, they have that jazz funk jam fusion thing going on. And the Funky Knuckles, and you have so many other great acts that are in that vein. I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, it's just going to keep getting stronger, and I think we're going to see more crossover, more genre crossovers like you've seen with the bluegrass scene already. I think you've already seen it with the electronic scene, where you have the jamtronic, we have instrumentation and electronic components, where a lot of the electronic stuff seems very scripted. You're seeing more instrumentation there and more collaboration and stretching again of the music, and going off script. I'm just excited to see what people come up with, because there really is no limit to that. You know, the jazz scene is really what birthed jam. I mean, I think that everyone would agree with that. The improvisational, conversational style of playing music really was born with jazz, and the blues to some extent, you know, with call and response. But it doesn't stop there. You know, it's gone in every single direction since then. So it's really neat to see those influences play out across different genres.
Kenny Withrow.
What's your view of the state of the Dallas jam scene today?
Well, I mean, there's probably better people to ask. You know, I think
I'm going to ask them too.
Well, I mean, some younger folks. You know, I'm hoping. You know, like I said, I bet there's bands we don't know about yet around right now.
Right.
You know, there's that guitar trio. They opened for us for New Bohemians. Like, hell, that was before COVID and shit. That's been a while. I don't remember the names of those guys, but I mean, right now it's definitely a lot of Forgotten Space, and it's a lot of Mojo and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The jam music I play happens a lot at the All Good, and I put together, you know, like when New Bohemians play, I always have people sit in and we just improvise. You know, New Bohemians are still improvising vessel. You know, we play at the All Good a lot, and I put together different things like this bluegrass band called Poor Devils and stuff like that. And there's the jazz improv. That's the thing you got to mention, is that a lot of the jamming now is a different kind of jamming. It's the jazz jamming, jazz gospel jamming.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's that whole
like
other scene in Dallas.
Yes.
That's like at the Freeman.
I think it's fertile ground right now, and it's pretty exciting, you know, that kids are going to figure out what to do, you know. And yeah, I think some shit's about to happen.
Leland Kracher.
I think the future of jam is in an interesting place around the nation and world right now in general. Bands aren't really doing the same tour grind that they were pre-COVID, and it's changed a lot. Where, you know, play the 150 shows a year and be on the road forever type thing is not really the model anymore. So I feel like, you know, if you look, there's different bands. One that's coming to mind right now is like La Special, where they're from the Northeast. You know, they are doing something really unique but accepted by the jam scene. They're not exactly a jam band, but they improvise here and there. But the vibe that they create is very much in the theme of jam. And so I feel like the jam scene here is going to be leaning more into that. I feel like there will still be a lot of improv. There'll still be the dead-oriented style, either band, you know, cover bands, playing it at some of the highest levels in the country, right? I mean, we're very spoiled here with the bands we have. So I think that lane will continue to develop and mature and grow and curate. But from like our perspective as Mojo and other people in our kind of lane are coming up behind us, I think it's going to be a lot more oriented around kind of what I touched on earlier, where the most successful jam bands have good songs. They have good things to be able to go back and listen to, and then they improvise from that structure. And I feel like the Dallas jam scene will lean a lot more into that if it wants to see growth and success than just straight up leaning onto improvisational jams and live shows. So I think the future of the jam scene in Dallas is much more oriented around bands like us and others getting into studio situations and presenting really catchy, crunchy grooves in minute forms or palatable forms that the current algorithm and world likes with social media, drawing people in to the jam scene without them maybe knowing it's a jam scene. And then they come to our show and it's like, holy, what, that's the song that I heard on Instagram that was a 90-second clip or something, and now it's are they still playing the same song? And it's 15 minutes. You know, I think we're gonna sneak jam onto people more than we're gonna be able to say like, hey, we're a jam band. You know, I think we're gonna have to draw them in.
I mean, like you were saying, I feel like there is a little bit of a stigma against it for some people, and I think they're just thinking about the Grateful Dead or like one band, and it's blossomed into 5 million other things, like all the rest of music mashing together. So
Micheal Kervin.
You know, I hope we can continue to carry the torch here. We were certainly in a much better position, and Arco's a hub, of course. Arco's a hub. I mean, I was able to take all my years, a good decade, everything I had over my years to bring to the table for John and Carrie to get this amazing place off the ground and have a jam scene hub for the South, not just Dallas, was my vision on it too. You know, as far as the scene here in Dallas, I mean, I think we're trying to rebound from the pandemic. I think we're in a good place, and we have such an amazing group of artists in this DFW Metroplex. And I think the more we work together, the better we are. You know, that's my story.
I'd like to thank all my guests this week: Kenny Withrow, John Larue, Micheal Kervin, Cocuzza, and Leland Kracher. And this week we had Ice Cold Fatty, never before heard, from Try More Mojo. You can check out the Dallas Famous podcast every week on Deep Ellum Radio, Sundays at 1, and then rebroadcast Tuesdays at 1. And then a couple weeks later, I put them all up on all the podcast places. So please check it out, review, rate, like, share, play it 100 times. I don't know. It's been fun. I hope you dig it.